So let me just shift and ask you this question. Have you ever been in a situation where you're just in over your head? Of course you have, right? So I want you to think about a situation where you've been in over your head. When I was back in college, I had a friend who loved to surf, and so I got into surfing. I wasn't good at it, but what we knew is that before a hurricane hits is the best surf, awesome surf. But you got to get it several days out. So if you hear a news report that a hurricane is coming and you get several days out, you get awesome waves. We didn't do that. We waited until the day before. And if you've ever been to the ocean, the day before a hurricane, it's a disaster. And so we grabbed our boards, we're out in the surf, and no joke, it took me, he was a good surfer, it took me about 45 minutes just to fight the waves, just to get out to the break, just to get out past where the waves were crashing. And so I'm totally exhausted. I mean, I have been fighting these waves, like I said, for 45 minutes. Imagine getting in the water. You're just struggling, swimming for 45 minutes nonstop. Man, I'm totally exhausted. I finally get out, and I'm sitting on my board where, now it's more like rolling. And I thought, man, I've been sitting here for a few minutes. I should probably pay attention to what's going on around me. And I turn, and there's this wave cresting. I'm talking a pretty serious wave. And oh no, what do I do? And so I try to spin to maybe I'll try to ride it, and then it just smashed on me. And I'm spinning underwater. This wave is just throwing me to the extent that I didn't know which way was up. That's how much I was getting tossed. And I know your surfboard is buoyant and it's attached to your leg, but it wasn't like it was pulling me up. The whole thing was just rolling, and so I wanted to swim, but I didn't even know which way to swim. And so I thought, well, worst case scenario, I'm just going to curl up like a ball, and I'm either going to go to the top or I'm going to go to the bottom. And so I did. I rolled up in a ball, and then I feel the sand. I'm rubbing against my face like sandpaper. I just hit the bottom, and I'm just getting dragged on the bottom of the ocean right there. And so I kick off, and there's this, I don't know how long it took. It felt like 5 minutes. But I'm going up, and I can see the surface. But I'm like, dear God, I'm going to die before I get there. I survived, by the way, in case you were wondering. I made it. But, sometimes we get in over our head. Sometimes because we made dumb decisions, like going surfing the day before a hurricane hits. And so you put yourself in a bad spot. You got yourself in trouble. And as a result, you're in over your head, fighting for a breath. But, I could tell that story because it's funny and it happened a long time ago. And because I don't want to tell the stories that hurt and are really painful about times when I felt like we were way in over our head financially. Maybe it was a health crisis for you, a diagnosis that you just felt way in over your head. Maybe it was a situation, a relationship. And you just were in so deep and you're getting tossed around and you don't even know how to pray. You don't know which way to even go because you can't tell which is the right direction. I don't know if it was a decision about your future, but you've all been in situations where you're in over your head, and the challenge about being in over your head is you literally can't tell which way to go. You're getting tossed and turned, and you're rolling in the waves, and you wish you could just figure out what's up, what's down, and you're just being tossed. And it can be disorienting, it can be unsettling, and you feel like your life is on the line. And, I think all of us, I said, of course, you've all been in situations where you're in over your head. But when you're young, you go out and you have ambition, and you're like, I'm going to conquer the world, or this is going to be awesome. And you set out like sailing, right? And the waters are calm, and it doesn't take long, does it? It doesn't take long for the water to get choppy and waves to start rising up, and all of a sudden life is just tossing you around. And so what do you do in those moments? What do you do when life's just throwing you around and maybe you're in over your head at this point? Turn to this story, the life of Jesus, and what I want to read to you is really a story where everything was going awesome. At this point in the life of Jesus, he's got crowds of tens of thousands of people gathering around him to hear him preach. In fact, crowds that are so large, at one point they're right on the beaches of the Sea of Galilee, which aren't really beaches. They're more like, think like a lake beach, all right? Like you got rock and sand. So they're there, and Jesus is getting pushed literally into the water. So finally he turns to one of his friends and he goes, hey, let me in the boat. So Peter lets him in the fishing boat. They kind of push out a little bit from water, and Jesus is preaching from the boat, and the crowds are just literally pushing up against him on the shore. And then Jesus is like, all right, let's get out of here. Like this is getting, like I'm done preaching, and we got to take a break. So they sail across the water, but the people follow him. That day, they just, hey, wherever Jesus is, and like the lake isn't that big. And so they literally watch the boat, and they're literally walking along the shore, following Jesus until he comes back to, they dock the boat. He gets off the boat, and there's tens of thousands of people waiting for him to do something more. And now it's late in the day. And so Jesus takes a loaf of bread and some fish, and he breaks it, and he feeds, it says 5,000 men, but really that probably was a crowd of about 20,000 people. Because you got wives, you got kids, and back in that day, they all had like 8 kids. And so it's a huge crowd of people. That was a joke, by the way. That was just have fun. Anyway, so this huge crowd, Jesus feeds them, and now there's like this euphoria in the crowd. There's excitement, there's energy, and you know what they really want to do? Well, I'll tell you. I'll show you here. We're gonna read it a little bit to you. After the people saw the sign, that was the feeding of the 5,000 men, maybe a crowd of 20,000 people. After they saw the sign Jesus performed, this is John chapter 6, verse 14, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So did you catch that? I mean, there's rebellion in the air. They get into this huge crowd. There's a certain like excitement, certain energy, there's a certain confidence when you get into a crowd. And so there's this huge confidence of like, we're going to make Jesus our king. And what? We're going to overthrow the Roman Empire to free us from oppression. And we're going to be liberated, and like the power of Israel is going to rise. And that's kind of what they feel like is happening in this moment. And so Jesus, it says, he dismisses the crowd. He makes them leave. And the term there is actually by force. Like it would be a similar idea to like basically like the police pushing a line and making them go back. He literally has to drive them out. Because these people are like ready to lead a violent revolution to overthrow Rome, with Jesus leading the charge. They want Jesus to be their king. Now, where are Jesus' closest friends and followers in this story? Well, bear in mind that they're part of the excitement, because to them, Jesus is the king, and they're going to be his generals. I mean, they get to sit right next to him on the throne, like, yeah, power of Israel, like we're buddies to the king. Like they see their position rising. Their stock is going up in value right now. And so there's this, and you can feel it, right? There's this energy, there's this excitement. And Jesus is doing first, so he begins to push away the crowd by force, but he also does this. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat. So before he sends away the crowd, he goes, hey guys, get in the boat right now. So they're all getting back in the boat. And then he says this, he goes like this, all right, here's what I want you to do. Go ahead, he tells them all to get in the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. So he goes, all right, guys, here's what I want you to get in the boat. I want you to sail across the sea, and I'm gonna take care of the crowd, right? So he's like, hey, you guys, go, everybody go home. I fed you. I've told you about God's love. And part of the thing here is that he doesn't want his friends, his closest followers, his disciples, to get caught in the revolt, nor does he want them to buy into faux success, right? He doesn't want them to get tricked into believing that this big crowd and this frenzied euphoria is what it's all about. He doesn't want them to get trapped in that kind of defining of success. And so he sends them out into the water on the boat to go to the other side, and then he dismisses the crowd. And where does Jesus go? He goes up to a mountain by himself to pray. And then in the middle of this story, a storm begins to hit the water. The Sea of Galilee is uniquely positioned to be susceptible to violent sudden storms. Now, that doesn't mean much to you because we can kind of like, if you're like me, you can follow your weather app and you know what the weather's going to be. Not just tomorrow, but you know it's going to be 14 days from now. And so if a storm is coming, you can see it coming. My wife and I had the privilege of going to Israel with a group of pastors where we toured Israel and we got a chance to stay in the city of Tiberias in a hotel right off the Sea of Galilee. It was like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We loved it. It was amazing. But it was also like, cue the effects. That night, we're having dinner in the, I guess like the kitchen, in the cafeteria of this nice hotel. And I'm not kidding you. I have never in all my life experienced a storm like this one. And that's saying a lot considering I've surfed in, hurricanes. So like this was legit. Like this was a really, really sudden, shocking storm. I mean, to the effect that the hotel felt like it was about to get blasted over. It was rocking us. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like the windows shook, and you could see like just lightning out right over like in the Sea of Galilee. It was remarkable. And so we're watching this storm like, this is what it was like. Just out of nowhere, boom. And the reason is where the Sea of Galilee is, there's mountain ranges that kind of converge, and so it creates like a funnel. And so you don't necessarily know when that wind is going to turn into a sudden storm. And so they're out there on this lake, and it's not a very big lake, and they're only supposed to go about 4 miles. That's all they had to go, which should have taken them maybe, like an hour or so. And they're out on this lake. They've been sailing for several hours at this point because the wind is fighting against them. The storm is rocking them, and they're kind of like afraid they're going to die. This is not going to end well for them. Especially these are fishermen who are highly seasoned in sailing. So if they're afraid, like if the captain of the boat that you're on is afraid, you're in trouble. Like this, like you might be terrified, but these guys shouldn't be, and these guys are terrified. And then it says this. So you got the situation, right? It's about 5 a.m. They've been on the water for about 8 hours. They're going nowhere in the middle of this storm. And shortly before dawn, so this is Matthew chapter 14, verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. And so let's just pause there. So Jesus comes out walking on the water. They see the grim reaper. Like they're all thinking, we're going to die. And then they see a ghost on the water, and they're like, we're dead. Like, this is going to end bad, right? This is the grim reaper coming to take them home. Like, they've seen the light, and now their life is over, right? Like, it's all, and so I kind of like, I love the little kind of play here because, like, they're in the boat shaking in terror, and Jesus is, like, skipping on the waves. And they see a ghost, Jesus sees them. And I love that, right? Like, no matter what you see, no matter what you're walking through, God sees you. You might not know where you're at. God knows right where you're at. You might not know which direction to swim because you're in over your head and you're in trouble. God knows precisely where you're at. He knows where you're at. He knows which direction you're going, and he knows how to get you through the trouble that you're in. Not only that, but here they are, terrorized in fear, and where is Jesus? Coming straight to them. And sometimes you feel like you're in it alone, right? Like you're in the storm, you're all alone. God, where is God in the middle of this? And there's God walking right on the waves, coming right your direction. He knows right where you're at. He's coming towards you. When you can't get to him, you don't know how to pray. You don't even know what to read in the Bible. You don't even know who to talk to. God's right there. He was there all along. And then it continues. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." And I so appreciate not only where Jesus is, he shows up, he says, "Take courage, it's me, don't be afraid." And then Peter, kind of out of his mind, scared in fear, like you are when you're in over your head or you're trapped in a storm in the middle of a lake where you're in a lot of trouble. Peter's like, "If it's you, just tell me to come to you." And this is a cry of desperation. Peter would rather go to Jesus than stay in a boat where he knows he's not going to survive. He'll do whatever it takes, including get out of a boat in the middle of a storm. And I've never even had that idea. I don't know if that sounds like a good idea to you, but if I'm in a storm, at the very least, I'm going to lay down in the boat. I've never had the idea. You know what we should do? We should all just jump out of the boat and see if we survive. But this guy is so desperate that he's like, I'd rather get out of the boat and go to Jesus, if that's really him, than to stay in this boat where I know I'm not going to make it. And what's the point? This whole story, you know, a real moment in the life of Jesus and his followers that really is a story about faith, where we discover in this moment faith triumphs over fear, right? Maybe you guys have seen like the people wear the shirts, faith over fear, or maybe you've seen that little image. But this is really the moment where we discover faith triumphs over fear. So how do you live the kind of life where faith triumphs over fear? I think first acknowledging that you and I, like the Sea of Galilee, are uniquely positioned to experience sudden, life-shaking storms. Like, you don't have to work hard at it, do you? Life just seems to rock you. You don't have to live very long to have your life wrecked and rocked. And the human life, human existence seems to be uniquely positioned to invite storms. Health storms, financial storms, relationship storms, storms in your mind, storms in your emotions, storms in your spiritual journey, where you weren't expecting it, you were just kind of out sailing, doing your thing, just trying to get from here to there, right? Jesus is like, hey, I want you to get in the boat and cross over to the other side, right? They're just on their way, and then boom, storms hit. And you were just on your way, and then bam, something smacked you upside the head. Suddenly, your marriage is getting rocked, or suddenly that relationship is getting shaken, or suddenly your finances are in disarray, or suddenly you get a diagnosis, or suddenly your mind starts playing tricks on you, and you start believing things that aren't true, and you're not even sure why you think that way anymore, or suddenly your emotions are running wildly out of control, and you're like, how did I get here? And we all get it. At the root of these sudden storms is something spiritual. We're not just experiencing these fear storms. It's that you and I are susceptible to fear storms because there's a spiritual crisis inside of every one of us because we live separated from God as a result of sin. Sin is this dark, sinister curse that lives inside of every one of us. We were born this way, where our instinct is to push away from God. And because our instinct is to push away from God, we head in directions that set us up for ruin. So we go off in our own way, we're separated from God, and as a result, life wrecks us. Now, am I saying that the storm you're going through is a direct result of your sin? No. That's not what I'm saying. But it is a result of sin that wreaks havoc in our world. Maybe somebody hurt you. Maybe their sin wrecked your life. Or maybe it's just the curse of sin that is wrecking the world, right? We live in a broken world. The world is not as it should be because something is wrong, right? Well, what's wrong is sin. Sin wrecks our world, and it wrecks relationships, and it wrecks our lives. And worse, it separates us from relationship with God so that it's not just that we live our life shipwrecked or, devastated in these storms. It's that we're headed toward an ultimate wreck, far away from God in eternal judgment. But where is Jesus in the middle of the storms? Where is Jesus in the middle of our wrong direction? He comes walking right to us, right? And Jesus doesn't just come walking on the waves, or I said kind of skipping on the waves. He came to rescue us. So Jesus comes from heaven to earth to give his life for our life. This verse, it says this. What is Jesus' response to Peter when he says, Lord, if that's you, call me and I'll come out to you on the water? Jesus says, come. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. Jesus came to you. How? By coming from heaven to earth, giving his life on a cross for us. The message of the cross is this, that every one of us were headed toward shipwreck. Every one of us were in the waves of certain destruction and ruin. Not in our mind, not just in our emotions, not just in finances or health or relationship, but in a spiritual storm that devastates every one of us, meaning no one is exempt from this spiritual destruction because of sin. And so God had to come rescue us. He came walking on the water of our sin and our judgment to rescue us from that storm by giving his life for our life, meaning his life, the eternal death sentence. He absorbed that in our place so that no one ever again would have to die for their sins if they would simply put their faith in Jesus. And that's what he did, right? He paid the penalty for our sins on the cross, that anyone who believes in him by faith is forgiven. And then Jesus not only died, right? He rose from the dead, and in his resurrection, he gives us victory, what we celebrate on Easter. He gives us victory over sin, over death, over eternal death, right? Because we know that life doesn't end in death. Death ends in forever life through faith in Jesus. And so Jesus came not just walking on the water, but Jesus came to every one of us, and then he invites us who are terrorized, who are living through these fear storms, and we're like, Jesus, help. And that's really what Peter is doing here. He's saying, Jesus, help. I'll do whatever it takes to get out of this storm, including get out of the boat and walk to you. And Jesus is like, yeah, come. And so Peter gets out of the boat. And you know really, if you want to like pull out a principle in that moment is, Peter did whatever it took to find salvation in Jesus. And really that's our lesson, right? Like, man, maybe you're just desperate enough to do whatever it takes to get to Jesus. And I find that oftentimes fear storms are the thing that pushes us to do whatever it takes to get to Jesus. And maybe for you, that's getting out of a boat, meaning getting out of a comfort zone, getting out of the familiar, getting out of whatever you're used to, or it's getting out of the boat that's trapped you in the storm, and you got to get out and just walk to Jesus. But the point is, Peter was willing to do whatever it took to get to Jesus and find rescue in Jesus. And maybe that's where you're at right now. Now, I want to unpack this idea of faith triumphing over fear and how you can apply that in your life. The key here I want to give you is this. Jesus offers fear triumphing faith, listen to this, through the storm. What we want is the kind of faith that gives us the peace without the storm. We just want to go back to the way it was before the storm hit, before the diagnosis, before the surgery, right? We want to go back to the way it was before our finances collapsed, right? Like probably many of you are like, I'd like to go back to the way life was 2 years ago, like before this mess, right? Like let's just go back there. In all of my experience, in all of my reading of the way God interacts with us, he doesn't ever bring us back. It's always forward. It's always there's a better ahead for you. And that's really the message of faith, is there's something better ahead for you. And so what he does is he invites us to a faith that triumphs over fear storms, that brings us through the storm, right? It's faith that grows through the storm. And so God, it's not that he sends the storm. It's not that he causes a storm. It's that he invites us, or he meets us in the storm, and then he grows us through the storm. You get it right? Like, it's not outside of the storm that your faith grows. It's not avoiding the storm that your faith grows. It's that God meets you in your storms, and then faith grows as you go through the storm, so that you begin to learn how to walk on waves, how to walk in the storm, and how to walk on the storm, because there will be more storms. This is what we all know. Every one of us are going to face storms that rock us and devastate us. And what do we need in order to face the next storm? It's fear triumphing faith. The kind of faith that goes, I know that God has met me in storms before. He came to me. He knows precisely where I'm at. He's with me. And whether I see him walking on the waves, whether I feel like my boat's going to sink, no matter what is going on, I know that there's a faith in me that God will meet me in this storm. And he will bring me through the storm. Here's what I know. The promise is that for every one of you, whatever storm you're facing, God will walk you through it. You're going to get to the other side. You're going to make it through. You'll come through it. It will make you different. It'll change you. But the best way it's going to change you is it will grow your faith. And so one of the things I know about meeting God in the storm, or God meeting us through the storm, is this: that the size or the view of God you have is directly correlated to how large the fears are in your life. Follow me here. Small view of God, big fears. Big view of God, smaller fears. And so part of meeting God in storms is really what you do is you begin to discover how big God is in the storm. So the next time you're facing a storm, you're like, no, my God's big enough. My God's the kind of God that walks on waves. My God's the kind of God that walks through a storm and meets me in the middle of it. And when you have a view of God that's bigger, then you can have a smaller fears. And when your fears become smaller, you're able to put greater faith and trust in a God who is always with you. So let me keep reading here. So, Jesus invites Peter to get out of the boat. And then it says this, but I guess, where am I going here? I want to make sure I'm not jumping ahead of myself. Verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. And there's this thought that, faith is the courage to face the impossible. Faith is the courage to face the impossible. Fear is faith in the impossible. Think about it, right? Fear is faith, is putting your faith in what could go wrong, believing that what could go wrong will go wrong. Fear is saying that whatever bad things might happen will happen. Fear is faith in the negative, faith in evil, faith in bad things happening. The reason I have fear is because I'm going, this could go wrong. This could go badly, and it will go wrong. It will go badly, and then that'll devastate my life. So faith is just flipping that around and saying, I know that fear is real, and I'm going to face fear storms, but faith is putting my trust in God, who is bigger than the storm, meets me in the storm, will carry me through the storm, and it allows me to face the impossible. So let me challenge you with this. If the direction you're going and the dreams you're pursuing, the things that you believe God wants to do with your life, if they don't scare you, they're probably not God. It's not big enough. Because the things that are God's size often will leave us terrified. Because he wants to meet us in the midst of the storm, in the midst of our trouble. So he doesn't ask us to do things that we can do. He asks us to do things that only he can do. Because that requires faith. Some of you are only willing to step where you know you can accomplish it, where you can trust yourself, not trusting God. But a life of faith requires you to fully trust God. Say, God, I don't know how this is going to happen, but I'm going to step out into the impossible, into what I don't think I can do. That's the point. You can't do it. You need God, right? And isn't that a point of prayer? Prayer is the ultimate expression of dependence on God. I can't do it. God, I need you. God, help. God, I trust you. God, I'm asking you to heal my pastor. God, I'm asking you to deal with my finances. And I realize that the central, whole point of prayer is not about me, right? But a part of prayer is conversation with God. And in that conversation, God, help. God, I need you. And unless you're facing the impossible, you're never going to learn to trust God in the impossible. So, if you never face a financial storm, you never trust that God is capable of providing for you. How do you ever know that God is big enough to provide for your finances? Unless your finances are in an impossible position. And you're in a finance fear storm, and then you see God show up and do what only God could do, and you discover that God is provider. How do you ever discover that God is healer unless you're in an impossible situation that you can't fix yourself, and you're like, God, help. And here's what I know, that God will meet you in the storm. He can heal, or he can bring you through. He can carry you. He can meet you in it, right? Maybe it's a crisis in the home, in a relationship. How do you ever know that God is a God of peace and God is a God of forgiveness? God is a God who can restore relationships unless you're in the midst of a storm in a relationship that you can't fix. See, God isn't causing it. He isn't even allowing it, but he is working in it to give you the courage to face the impossible. And there's another piece of the story. Jesus says to them, you of little faith, he said, why'd you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, so here's the story, right? Peter goes, help! And and Jesus, help, if that's you, call me out to the water. So he gets out of the boat, he walks to Jesus, and then he's looking around, and the waves are, rising up, and the wind's howling, and Peter panics, and he starts to sink. Jesus pulls him up, right? That's this like facing, courage to face the impossible. Jesus pulls him out of the water, and then he's like, why'd you doubt? You have little faith. And then they get back in the boat. The wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly you are the Son of God. And here's what I know. Fear triumphing faith must be strengthened and stretched. They're in the middle of a real storm. Peter gets out of a boat. Jesus, he starts, and he panics, he sinks. Jesus pulls him out. And Jesus' response is, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? And I don't know, at first when you read that, you're kind of like discouraged. Like, man, I feel like I'm that guy. I always feel like I'm ready to sink at any moment. But really what Jesus is getting at is this. Faith is the kind of thing that is strengthened and stretched. You grow in faith. So at this point, their faith is weak or small. But every fear storm has the capacity to stretch and strengthen your faith. Isn't that exciting? No, some of you are not. You're not convinced yet. All right. Here's the thing, right? How did they already know Jesus? Meaning their faith was anchored in their knowledge of Jesus. So here's what they know about Jesus. Jesus can heal the sick. Jesus is the kind of guy who can feed people with a few loaves and fish. He can feed tens of thousands of people with just a small lunch, right? They're like, yeah, next time we face that, we can believe that. They don't, but that's kind of where their faith is anchored, right? In this idea of we know a God who can feed thousands. So they have faith over finances, finance storms. They've seen Jesus do different miracles, but they've never had Jesus meet them when they thought their life was on the line. They never met a God who cared enough about them to come walking to them on the water. And suddenly in this moment, their faith is being expanded. They discovered a God who cares enough about them personally that he would come to them. They discovered that Jesus, the Son of God, knows precisely where they're at, even when they don't know where they're at. He knows which direction they need to go, even when they are tumbling in the waves and they don't know which direction to go. They discover that God cares enough about them to meet them personally. And when you're in these kind of situations, what God is doing is he's stretching your faith to discover him in a new way. Whatever you've walked through before, you've discovered a little glimpse of God, right? Like if you look back on your life, the fear storms you faced, every fear storm has stretched your understanding of God. Well, if it stretched your understanding of God, it stretched your faith. It helped you grow, helped you understand God in a new way. And because you understood God in a new way, you trust him more. So the fear storms you're facing, not that God causes it or even allowed it, but God will work through it to strengthen our faith. And so the next time you're facing a fear storm and you're terrorized by the storm, I want to give you like an anchoring thought. God knows precisely where you're at. He wants to meet you in it, and he's going to grow you through it. That doesn't guarantee the outcome is going to be what you want it to be, right? Because God doesn't always calm storms. Many times he brings us through them. He doesn't always heal the sick the way we want to see them healed. Ultimate healing is waiting for us in eternity. But God always meets us in it. He is present in it. He knows right where you're at. You are never far from God. He's watching you. He's watching over you. When you're in the boat and your life is getting wrecked, God is coming to you. And in the process, he is stretching and he is strengthening your faith. He's helping you to grow, for you to trust him. I know this. What God is doing in your life leads you to a place where it's always better than it was before. You don't need to go back to a pre-pandemic life. You don't need to go back to some place where you thought, man, life was better then, before the diagnosis, before the crisis, before that trouble, before the divorce, whatever the situation. No. You don't need to. Right where you're at in this moment, God wants to meet you. And as God meets you, walking on the water of your troubles, skipping on the waves of your crisis, God is present. He is nearby. He knows you by name. He is meeting you in the middle of it, and He's going to bring you through it. And when you get to the other side, your faith will be stretched. Your faith will be strengthened. And as your faith is strengthened, right, there's this growing intimacy in my relationship with God. As my faith grows, there's a greater connection between me and God, a greater trust in the love of Jesus. And that's what He's really getting at, is God's greatest desire is to have a greater intimacy with you, a greater relationship with you, to invite you to trust Him more, to know Him more. And so that's where I want to invite you. Regardless of where you've been before this moment, and no matter what storm you've been walking through or you're about to walk through, I want to reassure you, Jesus sees you. He knows precisely where you're at. Even if maybe you're like in the middle of, like you're getting tossed right now in the waves and you don't even know which way to go. God knows right where you're at. He knows which way, and He's going to meet you in that. Maybe for a few of you, this is a moment where what's really going on is spiritual. You can't even diagnose what you're feeling because it's spiritual. And so I want you to know this, that God is meeting you. He's right there. He's not a ghost. He's meeting you. Jesus is present in your life, but what He asks is for you to do the desperate thing. Say, God, I don't care whatever it takes, I'm going to go to Jesus. So maybe that's your step today, is to just take this desperate step of doing whatever it takes to come to Jesus. And for some of you that might be, I'm going to put my faith in Jesus for the first time, or I'm going to put my faith in Jesus and say yes to Jesus by faith. If you've never done that, man, what an opportunity, what a moment where you can just say, I'm going to put my faith in Jesus right now. For others of you, it's just an intimate moment where I can say, God, I need you. I need to meet you in the middle of this storm. Maybe you're on the front end of a storm. You just need, God, I need to know that you're in this with me. Maybe you've just come through one, and now you're looking back and you're saying, God, I need to see how you've stretched my faith. What I know is that God is meeting you in this moment. So I want to take a moment. I want to pray over you. Heavenly Father, thank you. I thank you for what you're doing in and through Lifehouse Shenandoah. God, I thank you for the miracle in Pastor Joel's life. God, even in what you're doing in him being able to get healthy and not be so gimpy, because, it's pretty pitiful. God, we thank you that you heal and that you do miracles even when we can't see how you're working. God, I thank you that in every individual right now that's in this room, God, that you're meeting them in their storms, in their troubles, that you are present with them. You know precisely where they're at. God, for some, it's crying out to you and saying, Jesus, forgive me. Give me new life. For others, God, it's looking back and seeing how their faith is stretched and strengthened, and then walking in that increased faith. God, thank you that you meet us here, and you're not far from us. In Jesus' name, amen. I truly believe that what's ahead for Lifehouse Shenandoah is better. I believe the best is yet to come for the church, for Winchester, Virginia, for your life, that the best is yet to come. And so we're going to invite you to respond with us right now.